Here's how I'm going to approach this tier list for legendary augments in the Illuvium Arena. Firstly, I'm not going to incorporate the imprints and the chips since they are highly team dependent. That being said, I recommend grabbing Tsunami, Enchanter, Colossus, or Arcanite as major grabs for imprints if they support your team. There's not much we need to talk about on that. I am judging these legendary augments based on how broadly they apply, and they're also based on how they interact with the current meta. Mostly considering the meta is very tank focused with a few viable DPS outside of the Scion spam teams that are going around at the moment. So without further ado, let's jump into it. The first one we've got here is Adaptive Reflection, where on being hit by an Omega, gain 25 energy resistance, which has max 10 stacks, and recover 2% of maximum health per second. So this isn't bad. The problem is that Omegas are supposed to kill you in like 1 or 2 hits, so stacking it up 10 times is a little bit difficult. That being said, you can pull it off against quite a few things, and with all the Scion spam, you can make some good use out of it. I would definitely put it in conditional though. If your opponent doesn't have any big Omegas, it's not that helpful. So the 5 we've got down the left are the 3 bid at the top, basically always bid for it, and I'm going to order them in order of which order I would do it. High priority, meaning it's almost always really helpful for your team. Conditional, which is obviously based on situational plays. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's 1 or 2. And then maybe being basically probably not, and useless, never bid on it. Okay. So next up, we've got Arctic Dominion, which is enemies within 30 hexes are inflicted with frost every 2 seconds. On being hit by an attack, the holder gains 2 dodge chance. This is actually really, really good. Sometimes it's really hard to justify taking this over other things, but it is really good. So I'm definitely putting this in high priority, especially on a frost team or any team with really heavy dodge implication or really tanky teams. Getting that 20 dodge on your frontliner, especially if you have heals on your team, can make a really big difference. Next up, we've got Communal Regrowth. Now, I don't know how others actually feel about this, but it's actually one of my favorite augments by far, especially with Indomitable, with Survival Protocol getting changed, not giving Indomitable anymore. It makes Communal Regrowth significantly more viable in the meta right now. Basically, the first time the holder drops below 50% health, it heals itself and its 3 lowest percent health allies for 50% of its maximum health. Basically, you can give your entire frontline a second life, which many of you might know if you've been playing the Illuvium Arena, can be the difference between winning and losing by quite a while. So it's very, very good. Carbonite Protocol is a really hard one to do. Now, even though it's a really good augment, it's really hard to justify it over many other augments. It does cost 25, which is a big advantage to it, but it's not that good. Holder is invulnerable for 8 seconds of combat start. Granite applies the same thing, and currently Granite is in the meta quite frequently, so you don't really need Carbonite Protocol. Now, it's okay if you don't have Granite, you don't have any really good frontline, but you should have one on your team anyway, so Carbonite is not really achieving all that much. Next up, we've got Evasive Veiling. Also one of my favorite augments. The first time the holder drops below 40% health, they become untargetable for 2 seconds, blinding and rooting all enemies for 5 seconds. Now, this isn't going to stop Omegas from casting, okay? So I'm going to put it in high priority for now. It's not going to stop Omegas from casting. So it's not going to work in absolutely every single situation like Communal Regrowth will. However, against really heavy fighter teams, frost teams, behemoth, all that sort of stuff, it can do insane work on your team. Not only saving your entire team, because if they all get blinded, you're pretty much invulnerable for 5 seconds, but allowing you to pick off key threats before they're able to do any serious damage. It's very, very good. The next one is Final Abounding. Gain 50 crit amp. Holders Omega can now crit. The one thing you would want this on is like your Ramfire, but it already gets your Holders Omega can now crit. You can maybe only put it on one other thing, being like your Ophisto, but I don't really see it get much play. It's only really good if you don't have many other good options. Now, it does cost 20, which is really nice. I'm going to put it low on maybe. I don't tend to go for it. I don't get to see it get used a lot. I don't recommend it myself. Futilic Resistance. Holders attacks reduce the target's physical and energy resistances by 5. There are just better augments. I'm going to put this in the useless category. Now, it's okay for 10 cost. For 10 cost, I'm going to put it bottom of maybe. It's okay. It's not too bad, but you really need alluvials on your team that are attacking frequently. And you need to be able to remove those resistances, but sometimes you're better off removing the grit and resolve and or piercing through resistances in general. So it's just not finding a place in your team all that much. Impact Dampener can literally win you games. Basically, nearby enemies have their damage reduced by 35%, which is a really big deal. It's not always a 3-bid option because some other things might be a little bit better. But if you get it on your team, it can win you the game if you place it on the right thing. For that reason, I'm putting it in high priority right now. Inevitable Ruin. Enemies within 30 hexes have their grit and physical resistance reduced by 50%. I have no idea if that is working properly. We're going to pretend like that would work properly, which would make it quite good. But again, it's very conditional. Now, in the current meta, is very tank dependent. And so it's actually pretty good in the current meta, but it doesn't work in every situation and it won't stop scions or anything like that. So it's good, but it's not game changing. Inhibition Field is very similar. It is conditional, where enemies within 30 hexes lose their energy gain by 50%. This is good if you can get it onto their enemy backline, but for things that don't cast a lot, which is about 60% of the teams right now, pretty much every team that isn't Scion isn't relying heavily on Omegas. And so it doesn't have as much of an effect, but it can really swing the game in your favor if you do get it. Next one is Jagged End, sorry. I've never really seen anyone take good advantage of it. I think it's just really meta dependent. I'm going to put it in useless for now. I think it's just meta dependent. It does, holders and its 2 nearest allies gain 6% crit amp on crit, up to 30 stacks. So if you were to hit the 30 stacks threshold, you would make your team pretty powerful, but is really only going to work with rogues. And even then, it takes too long to get those 30 stacks. I'm not feeling it. Lifestorm's a really cool one. I'm going to put it in conditional. You really need some specific alluvials to be able to place it onto. Otherwise, it's not doing much for you. Holder gains health regen and deals energy damage equal to their total health regen to enemies within 25 hexes as energy damage. Very, very powerful if you've got big health regen already, but with the nerf to Bloom that isn't really going around so much unless you have a heavy Verdant, it's not going to give you heaps of benefit. I'm going to put it low on conditional. Lights chosen. I'm pretty sure this is the best augment in the game. On combat start, Holder and its 2 nearest allies gain 40% attack power, 40% attack speed, and 50 Omega power. Very good. It gives significantly more attack speed than every other normal augment, and it gives it to Holder and its 2 nearest allies. You can win games off this thing. It's very, very good. And the Omega power means you can put it on pretty much anything as well. It's incredible. 3-bid it every time. Don't even worry about anything else on the board. If you get it, you pretty much win the game. Meteoric Onslaught. You know what? Meteoric Onslaught has fallen off for me a little bit, where 3 seconds after combat start and every 10 seconds thereafter, meteors drop on 3 nearby enemies, dealing 300 energy damage and stunning for 2 seconds. Very good for stunning backline and stunning healers and things like that. But the meteors don't drop quite often enough, and in a meta with so many smaller alluvials, the meteors are a little bit less impactful than they were in the past. Now, they're still very, very good, but the 40 cost sometimes doesn't justify it quite as much. Next thing we've got is Mirrored Erosion, where enemies have their resolve and energy resistance reduced by 50%. I'm going to put that low in the maybe category. Basically, if you've got a lot of Omega casters, sure, it's okay, but not many people run resolve in many ways. And so, I mean, it's okay, but there are just better augments. It's just not that good. Omnisaur Surge. On Omega, all allies gain 30 Omega power. This one's really awkward, okay? I'm going to put it up in conditional. If you have invokers, although this is helpful, you don't really need it. Your invokers are doing way more than this is going to ever do. But if you have other casters that aren't invokers, such as Scion and things like that, it's going to make a huge impact and make you absolutely wipe your opponent. But really, it's not going to be used in many other cases than that. So it's very conditional in that way. Okay. Next up, we've got Perpetual Entropy. Holder gains 5 energy regen, and its first Omega refunds 50% of the energy cost. Honestly, I used to think this was good. It's just not that good. The energy regen is helpful. It's not game changing, and you're not really going to get much more than 1 extra cast out of the game from it. and refunding 50% of the energy cost is not nearly as good as it sounds. Let me just put it that way. Power's Ascent, gain 50 Omega Power and 50 energy on combat start. I actually really like this one. It's going to be the lowest on high priority, I think. Basically, it has so many alluvials you can put it on that you can't really go wrong, especially for 20 mastery cost. And any big casters, it's a huge win. The 50 Omega Power and the energy just means they can cast so fast. And it's a little bit of a must for things like Ramfire and Dualef now. It takes so long to get their first cast off. Next up, we've got Quantum Reclamation. After casting its first Omega, holder refunds 100% of energy cost. This is very, very good. There are a lot of alluvials that benefit from a double cast. Ramfire is the obvious one. Things like Dualef and even Sea Forest do really well from it. And then you even have some more niche ones. I put this thing on a Titanor before. Casting the giant Ghost Beetle twice in a row not only stuns them for a long time, but it does surprisingly good damage. So Quantum Reclamation is good, especially in Invoker comps, but it's almost always has a place on your team. Let's put it that way. Reactive Transference. On being hit by an attack, gain 1 energy regen and 4 Omega Power. Now, I've never really used this one that much myself. However, I've seen other people use it quite a bit and do really, really well with it. You can get 10 stacks of energy regen, which is very, very good, and up to 40 Omega Power. I don't quite know what you would put it on too well, but you can stick things like a Dorius in the front line kind of consistently, put it on things like Geyser even. It can do really, really big things. If you put Geyser at the back and you only have one thing attacking it, it's going to benefit from this very quickly. The next thing we've got is Resolute Accumulator. This one's a bit hard to really think about. We're on combat start and every 5 seconds, gain 15 grit and resolve. Now, this is really good, but it is very conditional. You need to get it on alluvial that's not going to be targeted too heavily, but is still a frontline tank of some kind, especially against certain comps like fighters and scions. You can really mitigate all their damage with this alone, but you have to position very carefully and place it on the right thing. And for that, like, it's very powerful, but only when you use it right. The next one we've got is Restoration Suppressor. Enemies within 30 hexes have their healing reduced by 70%. In this meta, very, very good. Now, it's not going to win you games. I kind of wish it cost 20. I haven't had heaps of luck with it. But in a meta with a lot of Mystic, a lot of healing, a lot of Verdant, you're definitely going to want to have a Restoration Suppressor. If you can manage to bid for it, I would definitely go for it. Retribution's Call. This is also one of the best augments in the game, where you gain 70 Thorns and you taunt enemies 2 seconds after combat start. Thorns does pure damage. In a meta with so many tanks, any pure damage you can get is really helpful, especially in such a healing base. Thorns on a frontline tank can really change the way the game plays, and you can beat pretty much any mirror with this augment alone in pretty much any matchup. So very, very good augment. You can get away with a lot with it. Next up, we've got Sacarin Escape, where the first time the holder drops below 60% health, they become untargetable and invulnerable for 2 seconds and gain 40% attack speed. Now, this is good. It's not as good as Light's Chosen. It's not as good as many of the others. You really need an alluvial you can chuck it onto. Some alluvials are pretty much nearing too close to death at 40% health remaining that it doesn't have that good of an effect. I know it makes you untargetable, but you'd be surprised. That being said, 40% attack speed, you can't get that from regular augments anymore. So very, very good augment. Next up, we've got Sapping Hex. Enemies within 30 hexes lose 2 Omega Power per second and have their attack speed reduced by 15%. Honestly, for 30 cost, it just doesn't do enough. It doesn't reduce attack speed enough. It's not better than some normal augments, things like Siphon Matrix. I'm actually going to drop this in useless. I know everyone's going to disagree with me here. It's just not that good. I don't know what to say. Sentinel Resonance, when you drop below 75 or 50% health, the farthest ally gains energy regen and Omega Power. Very hard to pull off. I'm going to put this low in the maybe. It's good. It has use cases if you can use it properly, but especially if you're a beginner to the game, I wouldn't grab it. It's too hard to use properly, and there are just other augments that are better instead. 35 Omega Power is not enough to write home about, unfortunately. It's too conditional. Too much has to go right for it to work properly. Sentinel Stun Wave. First time you drop below 75 and 25% health, they stun the nearest enemy for 4 seconds. This is basically worse than so many of these other stun ones, things like Meteor and Evasive Veiling. It's just not as good. I'm going to drop this in useless. Like a 4-second stun is great, but you're typically putting this on your front line and then it's stunning a Grocco. Just not that good. Sharp Start. I half forgot about Sharp Start and I apologize. It is better than Light's Chosen. If not, then they're just as good as each other. Pierce 80% of physical and energy resist. If you haven't seen this on literally any attacker in the game, your attacker will literally like 2-shot every Illuvial on their team just by having Sharp Start. Give this thing to a Ramfire and it just nukes the entire team for free. It is a very good augment in this meta and in any meta, okay? Resistances are like the biggest bane of my existence right now and everyone's existence, and Sharp Start pretty much negates it. That being said, your thing holding Sharp Start, don't let it die too fast or you're not going to get any benefit. Next up, we've got Spatial Disruptor. Enemies within 30 hexes have Clumsy. I haven't used this a whole lot. This is really conditional. Like, it's good. It prevents them from dodging and things like that. There isn't a whole lot of air in the meta, so I'm going to chuck it low on maybe. But if there was, it would be pretty good, but it's too situational for you to bid on it super often. Stellar Devourer. This is one of my favorite augments. You get to steal 7 energy from your target, put it on anything that attacks fast, any caster. It goes on pretty much any Illuvial in the game and gives you some sort of benefit. It's just really good. Stealing energy is good. It will always be good. The Omegas are the biggest part of this game right now. Next up, we've got Sako's Gift. On combat start, 3 allies become indomitable, and 3 allies become indomitable, and allies within 25 hexes heal for 5% of their missing health every second. This heal does not come into play until you're low in health. Very conditional. On a Verdant team, sure, it might be helpful. 12 seconds of indomitable at the start, you don't really need that. It's just not good. Maybe it was good for a time. Doesn't heal you enough. The indomitable's not useful enough at the start of the game. It's just not that good. Next up, we've got Time's Respite. On Omega, gain a shield equal to 400% of maximum energy and immune for 8 seconds. The immune is the big part here. Now, there aren't as many things that can use this anymore. Phosphorus used to be able to use it really, really well, but there aren't a whole lot of things that need it. All of your casters are at the back of your team, so they don't really need the shield or the immune. That being said, you could chuck it on something like a Tynor, which is pretty good, or even like an Axodon. It has its place. It's definitely not useless, but it's really hard to make it work. For 30 cost at least. Titan's Readout. On being hit by an attack, gain physical resistance up to 50 stacks, maxing out at 250 resistance. Recover 2% of maximum health per second. It is very, very good. Very hard to break a frontline tank that has this, especially if they weren't the primary tank you're targeting at the start of the game. That being said, it doesn't save you and just win you every game, so it's not 3-bid, but it's very good. Next up, we've got Vampiric Price. Gain 50% Vamp, and every third attack heal for 5% of maximum health. I personally have never really gotten that to work in my favor too well, but I know people swear by it, and there are a lot of Illuvials that benefit from attacking lots and healing lots. Even casters are benefiting from healing, from doing great at mega casts. It's good. I mean, I've never really loved it, but it's good. Next up, we've got Vanquish's Uplink. After Holder is vanquished, its 2 nearest allies gain 100 energy, becoming immune and invulnerable for 4 seconds. Very hard to pull off, very hard to set up, but if your team is built for it with a lot of casters and a lot of even things like Enchanter, then you can get a lot out of it. Next up, we've got Vengeful Smite, where every third auto attack inflicts poison, wound, and frost, and stuns for 0.1 seconds. It's too conditional, okay? Now, it's good on paper, but unless you have like a full toxic team, maybe it's okay. But what you really need is some big rogues to go and stun backline casters and things like that, but they just don't survive long enough. It's just not that good. Next up, we've got Visionary Vanguard. Holder has True Sight, 30% increased attack damage, and 30% increased attack speed. It's good. The problem is it's really crowded out by things like Light's Chosen, and even Sacarin Escape. I'm going to put high up on maybe. If you think you can get it for a 1-bid, definitely go for it. If you think your opponent's going to benefit from it, you might have to put a 1-bid, but it's not that good. Most other augments are just better in general. We've got Vital Strike. Gain 1500 maximum health, holders attack till 2% of maximum health as extra physical damage. This is a very good augment. I love doing a 3-bid on this thing. Now, it's not as good as these other 3-bids. It's probably the worst one out of all of these so far. It's very, very good. The damage this thing can output is insane. And the 1500 max health can essentially double the max health of something. Putting this thing on something like a Gorilla is actually really good because Gorilla wants to do a lot of hits, but it's a little bit too squishy. So you get a lot of best of both worlds situations by putting Vital Strike on things. Next up, we've got Void Cleaver Catalyst. This thing literally ended my career early recently. It's just 5% of max health as pure damage. It's such a tank meta. It's almost always necessary, and it's probably going to win you the game for the most part. So go for the Void Cleaver. Second last, we've got Void Energy Reservoir. On Omega, all allies gain energy equal to 20% of the holder's maximum energy. I haven't really used this a whole lot. I'm sure it's pretty good. I'm going to put it high on conditional here. It's good. It's good. And last but not least, probably my favorite augment, outside of maybe Sharp Start, is Warp Wave Assault. Now, it's not as good as these top 3, okay? But Warp Wave Assault, 7 seconds after combat start, summons a board-wide wave, giving allies 50 energy and stunning enemies for 3 seconds. The momentum swing on this thing is insane, okay? Imagine if it did damage as well. But seriously, the 50 energy, very good, used in pretty much every team. Board-wide stun, very good, used in pretty much every team. It costs 50, that's its one draw. And 7 seconds after combat start is actually really good timing. You're knocking out some casts from that thing. It is very good. What can I say? If Warp Wave is on the board, I don't even care if those other 3 are there. I'm always putting 3 on Warp Wave. I just love it too much. All right, maybe it is the best augment in the game. I think Sharp Start is, Last Chosen and Void Cleaver are pretty close to each other. That is how I'm feeling about the legendary augments in the Illuvium Arena. If you want to go play the game, there's a link down in the description down below. Go click it. Go download on Epic Games. Very easy to download, very easy to get into. There are lots of teams being made by the pros in the Illuvium scene.